My name is Matt Sitter. Priya, I think you're the only quote unquote new person who's
Correct.
here today.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you some idea of the background. So we started AFN actually as a CEO network where the goal was to bring together people who would not otherwise have been connected to each other. We think that the best way to find opportunity and change is having a network that's diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. So bringing that group together, and part of what we thought was really important with networks, we saw that being manifested within the chief of staff function. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why we do that focus for chief of staff office hours. Again, just thinking about the rules for today, if you're on screen, I'll ask you a question. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk through a little bit of a topic first, like a few slides just on priming, and then it's all about conversation. And so as I'm putting up the slides that are here, the folks who are my partners in this endeavor, Sylvia and Betsy, who's on in the background. If you need help, call on Betsy. John Prevatera, who's not here. Can everyone see my slides now? All right, good stuff. Okay, today we want to talk about cutting through the noise. So when we're thinking about you as a chief of staff, it is a noisy job. You are hearing things all the time from all sorts of different people, and thinking about what's important and what's not is really important to us because you're trying to be as effective as possible with some of those scarce resources that you have, specifically time. We look at the chief of staff position through three specific identities: the chief network officer. You know a bunch of people in the organization, you know what makes them tick better than anyone else. You are a master of time. You know how to use time better than anyone else in order to gain the information to help the organization go. And then you're the Vision Sherpa. So you may not be coming up with a vision for the organization, but you're definitely carrying the bag on it and helping other people to connect the dots. So as we think about this idea of cutting through the noise, I really like this quote from John Wooden: never mistake activity for progress. We see a bunch of people just like spinning their wheels. It doesn't mean that they're actually getting anywhere. Your job is to help people get somewhere. I like to put up the Eisenhower Matrix because this is just a useful framework for us to be able to think about importance versus urgency. And can you actually put this against what your tasks are? And that's going to dictate some of how you think about it. If something is important but not urgent, you might be able to wait on it. If something's not important or urgent, you can put it off to the side. One of the folks who I believe Brian introduced us to, she actually had something called the burn filter, which we'll put in the chat towards the end. Just a link to that. She actually had a way that you can think through those things. I thought it was really useful, but uses a lot of the ways that we think about things through the Eisenhower Matrix as well. So when we think about dividing this up into what we're doing, so strategic, what's the long-term big picture that we're looking at? I'm thinking about who are the important people that are there and how we're creating value. Okay, always being able to level ourselves up. We said we're the Vision Sherpa. That means you need to have your strategy hat on to think about what's going on. Thinking about it from an operations perspective, this is the how on it. And I love to use the term leverage with respect to the chief of staff. You're here to make everyone else 20, 50, 200% better. How are you actually creating leverage through the tasks that you do? And thinking about tactical, there's sometimes where the trash needs to get taken out, and that's going to be a barrier. And so as chief of staff, sometimes you got to take the trash out. So when we think about this as a chief of staff, we're trying to make sure that we know where we're going. Your role with the principal really helps you in terms of that, but making sure that others have that strategic vision is important. For the operational side, what are the competitive advantages and how are you making sure that others know those? And there are things that actually help along the way, reinforcing and rewarding them. And then from a tactical end of things is every place that you spend time, there's opportunity cost, meaning that you can't spend that somewhere else. So thinking about that. And thinking about a lot of what we get around the noise is where urgency happens. So is something actually really urgent, or is it this sense of false urgency that's being pushed out there? And are you actually, thinking about what anxiety that's being developed? There's stress and confusion around it. That's more of the the false urgency that's there, or with real urgency, you're being driven by the purpose and it's ultimately pushing people in the right direction to help the organization long term. So when we think about the questions that we're going to look at from today, all organizations have their own type of culture. What's driving the noise in your organization? Where do you see it coming from? And what's to say about your culture? That urgency or that noise, when does it appear like it is false urgency that we're looking at? I always like to think about this in the context of relationships as well. So if we're thinking, hey, there's a lot of noise that we're dealing with, if you're helping to relieve some noise or if you are addressing some noise out there, which may not seem strategically important, can it help you in terms of a relationship? And then thinking about where you've had success in the past, how have you helped shift people away from those things that are just noise and instead of relative to something important? All right, so those were our slides today. And going into our questions that are here. So just thinking about what drives noise in our organization, we'll start there. Let's see, let's go to Jordan. Let's talk to you first. I mean, you got a big project that you're going on. You got a lot of things that are taking up your time. What drives the noise in your organization? What's its source and what seems to like hit a chord more than anything else?
Yeah. So as a part of this project, there's so many interdependencies with, what the onboarding or credentialing team does and how that affects, really the sales arm of the organization. And there is a lot of noise right now around the, let's call it negative impact of really standing up this team over here. Well, this team is being reduced over here, but the team being reduced is the experienced ones, and so it is causing a lot of confusion and noise across the organization. And it's tough because if you look at like the aggregate data, the aggregate information tells you that it's going okay, but the noise of the 15% where it's not going okay is
Oh,
very noisy, and it does have a real impact on the business, right? So I don't want to like understate it, but yeah, it is quite noisy to the point that a lot of our senior leaders are firefighting, and that's
okay.
all
Yeah.
that they do.
Yeah.
So it's
And maybe just a question for you on that. Do you feel like your organization is a firefighting organization where it's just like, hey, if there's not fires to fight, we don't really know what to do?
right now, I would say it certainly feels that way.
Okay.
Yes. And my lens is, I have like purview to, let's call it, 60% of the organization, right? In terms of my role. And so, that, yeah, I mean, that firefighting mentality, it really started with COVID, I'll call it, and it
Okay.
really hasn't subsided to the degree that I think everyone would like to say. And it started with good noise, so to speak, where the industry is growing like crazy. And for those who don't know, I'm in the travel nurse staffing industry, and so with COVID, that obviously exploded. And then after we kind of hit the peak, and then we saw a sharp decline, then it became there's many reductions and layoffs and things like that, which then puts more work on the few individuals that are here. So it just felt like it's this constant firefighting battle, so to speak.
Okay. Well, and one of the things that I definitely take away from what you're talking about is, some of where noise is being driven from is personal anxieties of people. And there's all sorts of different ways that they're interpreting it, but it's just like, hey, what's making me worried right now? That's the thing that I'm going to talk about. And not
Mm-hmm.
everyone's worries are the same as well. So,
Yeah, and there's tremendous pressure on the organization that is being heard from our where it's PE backed, so it's coming from the board to the executive team, and then it just trickles down.
okay. Yeah.
And
External pressure.
ex-
And I do think that like, as we're thinking, AI is on everyone's mind right now, right? But like it gets talked about all the time. And there's uncertainty coupled with a demand for action around that. So it's just saying like, hey, the CFO says, well, what are we doing on AI? And with great uncertainty surrounding that, that's a good recipe for mistakes. And so we're going to see a lot of mistakes being made, but this pushes up the anxiety and noise around. It's just like, we don't really know where to go. And so they're demanding action, and we're doing a lot of running around associated
Yeah.
with that.
Well, and then, California comes out with this guidance or this potential law that's coming where you can't use it to make employment decisions at all, which is wild.
All right.
And yeah,
All right.
it's if you haven't seen it yet, Matt, I'm sure you will at some point. Priya, you're nodding your head like you may have seen this as well.
Yes, I have with Workday especially. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Are you all Workday shop? Sorry, Jordan, just trying to understand. Okay.
No, please.
Oh.
Yeah, we don't work with Workday, but a lot of the facilities and hospitals that we work with use Workday. That's actually really rapidly growing in hospitals specifically, but it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, so you're right. The AI noise is real. The kind of just chaotic nature. It's a chaotic industry in general. The healthcare or really staffing in general, from what I've learned, it's very chaotic in nature. And then when you add these other aspects, it just becomes very, very noisy.
Okay, so uncertainty and anxiety, I think those are two big causes that we're seeing around noise that's out there. Casey, any other things that you'd add as sources of noise that you're seeing?
I think anxiety is the big one. And the downstream consequence of that, which we touched on a little bit, is executives kind of implementing a spray and pray philosophy where we're constantly being asked to spin up new programs or projects without seeing the impact of them. And that yanking around of the ICs really disillusions them and decreases trust.
Okay. And so the stuff that we're spinning up, we're asking for results really quickly on it. And we're not seeing results right away, so we got to spin something else up too. April, good to see you. From your viewpoint, are you seeing any other sources of noise?
Yeah, so it's funny that the reason I came on here today, well, is because I've missed seeing you guys, but the whole chaos thing is so relevant to me as we just got a new CEO and he is in a new PE, firm is investing in us. And so we are seeing a lot of changes and people are excited about it. And in parallel to that, which I already had planned, was I did a culture assessment and an organizational network analysis in parallel to all of this change. And so people are excited, like they feel comfortable that we're going in a good direction, but they're also freaked out. Like the anxiety is there. And so I feel like I spend a lot of time sort of framing this in the right way for people to sort of calm their anxiety, but get them to see that we have a plan. In the past, a lot of the chaos we had and the noise was from a lack of clear planning or like the outcomes of the survey, too much bureaucracy, which is ironic in a 70-person company. Things like that. And so not having the good decision-making frameworks and things that sort of ease people's anxiety affected the noise in our organization. And so with the changes coming, I think it's going to be positive and less noise.
Okay, so I mean, enthusiasm is great, right? You've got some anxiety that's coupled with that. I'd say also like folks are looking for direction. How are we actually being pointed in a particular manner? And if you don't feel like you have agency over where an organization is going, you're relying on someone else to provide it. And you're like, all right, I'm waiting for instructions, but I don't know what the heck they're going to be.
Yep, that's happening.
All right.
I mean, and you can't communicate everything at once, right? I mean, like I teed it up, we've had a lot of change so far, but we have a lot more change at our last all company when I described the data. And so people know more change is going to happen, but like you said, it's that limbo.
Well, and I think coupled with this, when we've got people who have anxiety, their cognitive capabilities are a little bit diminished. So you're exactly right. You can't explain everything at once because they're just not going to be capable of taking it all in.
Bring it back to strategy. Like this my CEO said to me this morning, we just have to always remember to bring it back to what we're the strategy.
Great. Okay,
Ground 'em.
yeah. So the Vision Sherpa job, how are we continually bringing people back to the direction that we've got here? Brian, I saw you just posted in the chat. Just go ahead and tell us how you're thinking about things.
Yeah, I mean, that's my background, right? As a business strategist, and you know, I have a couple of catchphrases that I use a lot. One of them is, if everything's important, nothing's important. And I think I've shared in this group a lot the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is if you in my opinion, the best resource out there for studying strategy is still Michael Porter's book Competitive Strategy, but it's a very heady academic read. And so Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is like a Michael Porter for dummies almost, and it has a lot of really good examples in it. The best example is Intel. And so, you know, there's a lot. Well, I think what we were talking about when we first started was a lot of noise that just happens from the day to day, which as chief of staffs we're probably super exposed to because we're the gatekeepers for our principals. It's hard to fight through that. To get to the higher level, sort of, if you think about it, almost like the analog being like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like you've got this kind of like lower level noise, and then you've got the noise that's really important, which is, can we answer two questions for everyone that works on the team, which is, are we focused on the right work, which is all about strategy, right? Because we could do an infinite number of things. But when you read Michael Porter and when you study it, what you realize is like, there's a couple things that are inherent to good strategy, which is why that book is so important. Is like, a good strategy tells you how you're going to do something. It's not just a metric. It's not a KPI. It's not like, oh, we're gonna hit $20 billion. We're a $10 billion company. Well, yeah, great. How are we gonna do that? When you boil it down to like somebody saying, I'm quitting my job to start a $1 billion company, like, how? Right? So that's the first part. And then the second part is like, you've also got to tell people inherently what you're not doing, right? Because and then you've got to document that, because what that does, and so you got to document that and give your team the air cover to be able to say no to work that falls outside of that. Because like I said, if everything's important, nothing's important. So as a chief of staff, you should be creating the mechanism that allows people to say no to things. Like if you're a Queer Eye fan, you like JVN, right? Who gave you permission? Well, the chief of staff gave me permission to say no to this work because it falls outside of our strategy, right? Everything we're doing is galvanized to these 3 strategic directives. And if we deviate from that, we diffuse our light, and it becomes less laser focused, and it's not going to cut through the metal like we need it to, right? Like, so that's why for me, like, strategy is so important, because it's like, if you don't have that at the top, it doesn't really matter how much noise is created. Everything else is noise. And right now, as a functional strategy leader, we don't have a good functional strategy. We don't have a good company strategy that's been delegated to us. So we can be successful. We can come up with things that we think, but how do we really know that what we think is right at the functional level for my principal, who's a C-level executive? How do we know that ladders up to the company's success or what the company's trying to achieve? It might be counter to that. And that's really, shitty to find out after you've done a year worth of work.
Right. Well, so as we're thinking about the chief of staff, right, you guys are a filter for a lot of what's going on. And we're thinking, if you think about the scarce resources that are around for absolutely everyone, time and attention, what Brian said is exactly correct. Is like, all right, we got to be able to help people understand what to do, but also what not to do, or else they're going to waste some of those scarce resources that are out there. Quentin, you guys are in, let's just say, kind of a noisy industry right now. When we're thinking about some of the things that's false noise out there, things that you want to be able to filter out for other people, how are you identifying?
I absolutely love this conversation today, because we are in the middle of a lot of mass communications, and we're trying to figure out, what are we saying? We just had a board meeting yesterday. We have an all hands coming up next week. We're in the middle of trying to generate registrations for our big upcoming event. And it really and we speak to we have a broad swath of audiences. So we support people getting hired in tech, but that also means we're supporting corporations to figure out what they need. And one of the things that we're trying to communicate to our internal staff in terms of how to focus and to clear the noise is actually taking the time to actually listen to what people need. There was a quote that I learned recently from an event that I attended, and someone said, for your customer, you have to fall deeply in love with the people that you serve. And when you do that, they'll feel it. And I feel like as an organization, we haven't taken the time to fall deeply in love with the people that we serve. Like we have sort of high level understanding of what their needs are. But as we've taken the time to figure out actually what their concerns are, both from the talent that we're serving and the corporation that we're serving, we're actually beginning to clarify our pillars for operation. And so, for instance, I'll give you a very specific example. The theme for our conference this year is Unbound. And one of the taglines we provided was sort of like, find your potential. It's very like lofty, but what we realize is that we have to be specific about what attendees can expect to receive after attending our conference. So we've made it very clear. We've had to reintroduce this internally for our org so that we can strategize on business ops. We're here to help get people trained, funded, hired, promoted. And by attending our conference, here are the numerous ways in which we're doing those 4 things. And any new opportunity or announcement that we make has to be aligned with one of those 4 pillars. So kind of what you're talking about, Brian, in terms of what we're not going to do. Well, if it's not underneath one of those 4 pillars, we're not doing it. Or if we're interested in doing something, we have to define how it's advancing one of those 4 pillars. So I think taking the opportunity to listen, to reorient yourself, I will say it that way, to reorient yourself with the problem you're trying to serve, because so often we get accustomed in the to-dos because we've always done it that way. That if you take the opportunity to listen to what the audience needs, then you can better define how your operations are going to be, because you're aligning that operative directly with the need of the audience.
Great. Well, and when you talked about falling in love, right? Like you took that's an emotion, right? That we're talking about. But anxiety, we said, is heavily emotional as well. So are we paying attention to the emotions that are there and some of the causes of the noise that are around this? Quentin, CEO, is a member of our CEO network, and so I get to hear a little bit about what's going on with them. But Quentin, I do think that if you could throw in the chat at some point like a URL for your conference, I do think that there's a number of people here who could conceivably be interested in it later on. Priya, our new person, how do you identify some of the noise that's out there? How are you like, okay, I know for sure that this is something that's not important for us to work on?
No, it's extremely important. And I feel any organization at this point of time is facing a lot of noise, a lot of anxiety, and we are no different. I feel a lot of it also depends how the leaders communicate within the organization. If there
Say
is
more
a
about the
lack,
how. Yeah, like
yeah,
what are your different hows that you see?
like how often do you communicate?
Okay.
How, like how Quentin said, are the leaders taking the time to listen to what the teams have to say? Okay, you've set the priorities. You're trying to strategize those priorities and make sure that the teams are achieving those priorities, okay, which were set. Some of them keep changing because the reorgs happen, especially in large organizations. We're like thrown in, the reorgs keep getting thrown in. Teams, like somebody said, the ICs are yanked. We are experiencing the same thing over here. But how well are the leaders communicating? I feel the biggest gap that the teams feel, or the anxiety that the teams feel, is lack of clear communication from the leaders most of the time. And when the leaders are not communicating, maybe because they themselves don't see the clarity and how to move forward, is where the anxiety starts to percolate down the team, and the noise then becomes unbearable. And that is when we start talking about culture, and we start doing the culture assessment, etc. And I think that itself is a noise, because why are we doing this cultural assessment? Because somebody went and complained to the VP or to the SVP, hey, people are dissatisfied, or people are upset, or people are not understanding what are we doing, what's the direction that we are going. I feel communication is a big thing. A lot of times the leaders either don't have time because they are so occupied in different meetings, etc. How are we, as chief of staffs, stepping into and giving him the insights of the pulse of the team?
Okay, so when you said, hey, you got to take the time to communicate. So part of where I think that most people conceive of their jobs, they don't actually put in their job description, I'm a communicator, when in
Yes.
reality, that's probably 90% of your job. Even if you're working on a spreadsheet all day long, if someone else is going to have to read it, that is a form of communication that you're
Yeah.
putting out there. So how are we actually continuing to do that? And the reason why we don't communicate is partially we got this other big long list of what we've got to do. We don't conceive of ourselves as doing that. And we have a tendency to make an assumption, if I understand it, everyone else must understand it as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. I feel we have these all hands, and that's one time that we are communicating our priorities, but and then you leave it over there. I have seen it a lot of times that our priorities are set up by a different section of people, which might not be aligned by the teams, or the teams might not know what those priorities are, and communicating them clearly or breaking them down. That is where the communication breakdown happens, and a lot of anxiety, because then you're starting to put pressure on the teams, right? Hey, you need to achieve this. This is a timeline set for it, but that clarity in that communication has not existed right from the beginning. So, my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I love that you brought the all hands, because sometimes that is assumed to be like one of the cure-alls around this. It's just like, all right, we're gonna have an all hands. Everyone's gonna hear what's going on here. And when we think about this, meetings are a tremendously expensive form of communication. When we're talking about an all hands, we're talking about spending a lot around that. What are you able to accomplish within that? Typically, you're not getting interaction back and forth. So if people do have questions around something, they're not being clarity. So what can you actually accomplish within that? And what else do you have to be able to do to support that as well, are things that we got to think about. All hands isn't going to get it done. It's a necessary but insufficient ingredient for us to be able to look at. Jason, how do you cut through the noise? How do you identify what those noisy things are, and then be able to push those off to the side?
I take a look at what is the vision and the mission of the company, and is the thing we're having a conversation about aligned with those two things? And it really kind of goes back to what Brian mentioned on the Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. An excellent book. And when you have done the work to figure out what the vision and mission are and what those strategic policies are, they enable you to rapidly make a decision on, is this conversation aligned with the strategic policies for where we're going, or is this something that falls outside of it? And if it falls outside, then it requires you to have a conversation. Should we expand our strategic policies? Do we need to somehow pull this thing in? Or is this just, to your point, the noise that we can set off to the side and get to it a little bit later? So I use that. I found that after reading that book, I have changed my lens, reshaped my lens to include those things. And it really has helped me understand what's noise and where's the focus, what's priority.
Great. Yeah. Where are we focused? That's a filter for us. And then can we help other people apply that filter? Go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to ask a question if you're familiar with Amazon style tenants, because I think what Jason brought up is a really good point in terms of like not just how does Jason as the CEO filter filter ideas that come to him, because ideas come all the time, right, from all over the organization, and you have to figure out, well, do we stop doing what we're currently doing, or do we do something else? Or I think, Casey, you described, like, do we just try to do everything? And usually most organizations try to do everything. So why brainstorms are always like about doing more and never about doing less. But Amazon came up with a really good framework, and I don't know if you are familiar, for basically coming up with a list of tenets that help your team make decisions as if the senior leaders were in the room.
Okay, so in the absence of like specific guidance, you've got principles that you could actually follow to help you make the right decision.
Yeah, if you want, I have a one pager that when I teach tenets or teach teams,
please share it.
tenets.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can dig it up
Absolutely.
real quick. I might even have a link to it I can share. Yeah.
Cool. In our CEO groups this week, our topic was dissent versus alignment. And so, because there's times where you very much want dissent, where you're trying to uncover things. There's times where you're like, hey, we're actually moving towards harmony. And we talked about like what some of the sources of dissent might be, positive and negative. One of the things we ended up talking about is where people feel like they really want to dissent is when they have some sort of moral or ethical connection to it. And oftentimes, like, that's where passions are going to be pretty substantially inflamed. You might not be able to go down the strategic or vision road when that's happening, because if your passion is inflamed around something, you're in an emotional state, it's going to be tough to be able to get off of that. Christina, when we're thinking about people who are in a state where you're like, all right, I can tell you what the vision of the company is and how we're related to it, they're not ready to go there. How can you help people turn down the temperature on what they're thinking of so that they can start to regain the ability to think somewhere else? You got a tough one.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind, it needs to start with the understanding. We need to make sure that people understand the vision. Sometimes they do not. We can wave it all we want and show it on screens and the walls, but sometimes people just do not understand. And that is the first thing. Coming from the company that has grown quickly throughout COVID, I've noticed that we haven't communicated well, just because we assume that we're still the small company and that everybody talks to everybody, which is not the case anymore. So communicate well and make sure that people understand the vision. That's the first one. Another one is a chief of staff. I do believe that it is our job to maintain the calm as much as we can. Very often, in chaotic times, people will panic and they will stop being creative. They will think in binary terms, right? So even though it's very easy to fall into the trap of venting with people or just saying things that are true, that sometimes you should hold to yourself to keep that calm on the team. So that's something that comes to mind.
I love that. Part of your job is to keep the calm. I was at a doctor once. They were doing some sort of test on me. They had to take some blood, and doctor like started putting a lot of pressure on my arm. And someone fell outside. And they're like, hey, we need a doctor to come over here. And he's like, I can't come out right now. He's like, hey, doc, what's going on? He's like, oh, I hit the artery here. I'm just putting a lot of pressure on it to make sure that you're okay and like nothing to worry about. And like, he says to me, are you gonna exercise at all? In the next couple of days? I'm like, well, I was gonna go play water polo. He's like, I don't know if I would. But just in case, if you start feeling anything, I wouldn't worry, but just go to the emergency room right away. All right. So he was putting everything, like, there was a problem that was here. He was trying to take care of it. I was fine, by the way. But he's like, hey, my job is to keep the calm here. If I freak out, Matt's definitely going to freak out too. All right. So as we're thinking about this a little bit further, Miho, how do we shift people towards those things that are important? Towards, we've identified some of the noise. What else would you do to help shift people towards those areas that we think are important for us to focus on?
I think kind of similar to what Jason said, I think kind of falling back to what is the customer wants, whether that customer is your corporations, like consumer customers, or could be your stakeholders too, like whoever you are serving your work to, and making sure their need is met. But also kind of definitely hear them out as well. Like there's some emotional things always attached to it, and not to like wipe it off right away, but just hear them out to fully understand. Then sometimes like I've seen some escalation culture that is popping up. Then when that's somebody's escalating up, everybody's escalating up, and sometimes you have to gently escalate them down by saying, bring the solutions, then let's talk, kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So I think really importantly, hear them out. One of the things that gets talked about often as a coaching skill is acknowledge and validate. Doesn't mean you have to agree with the person. You can say, like, I heard what you're saying. Anyone who is in that position might feel the same, right? They need to be heard around it. If you tell someone to calm down, that is the surest sign they are not going to calm down. You need to hear what they are saying first in order to be able to actually move past it. One of the other techniques that we hear about is having the person be able to call out themselves what they're feeling in the moment. Is just like, hey, tell me a little bit more about what you're feeling right now. If they can call out the emotion, that actually re-engages some of the objectivity in their own brain and helps them back away from it a little bit. So allows them to actually think about things in a different way where their fight or flight response is not as engaged anymore. Sylvia, other ideas on how we can actually, shift people away from the noisy stuff towards the stuff that's really important?
Sometimes I find that just lightening up the mood a little bit. Sometimes when things get a little heavy, people become rather focused and how should I say it, like hard to really listen to the message. So sometimes I feel like when we actually try to lighten up the message a little bit, it actually can deliver a little better. Like basically you don't really want to hit someone's head with a hammer, so to speak, right? You kind of just want to kind of maybe like more like a background noise, maybe through osmosis, that they're getting the message. I know earlier we talked about all staff meeting. That is indeed one of the great venue of delivering a message. I certainly find that a lot of times this is a good space to share information, such as directions of what the company is heading towards, whether from the product side or from the sales and marketing side. But again, just make sure the message is not overly burdened. I've definitely sit in meetings where there might be different groups and areas would totally zone out. Even though we're trying so hard to deliver a message and share and communicate, sometimes when you can overdo it, and then the end result is actually the opposite. Similarly with emails as well, don't make sure it's not like a long, like 3-page, then because no one is going to read through it. So
Right.
is that finding that fine balance, I think, is the key.
Okay, so I love that. Calm and lighten the mood. Okay, so, but also we're saying your communication has to be focused in some way for people to actually get the message. The more you say, like, we're just going to over communicate on this. Too much communication means that there's extra noise that's out there. I really like the idea of lightening the mood, though. Last week in our member session, we talked about the concept of luck. And if you conceive of yourself as a lucky person, you're a lot more likely to attract people to you. If you consider yourself as an unlucky person, people are going to be like, hey, I don't want to be too close to the unlucky person because that means that stuff might catch, right? So thinking about how can we actually reframe this towards as Sylvia was saying, lightening the mood, but I would say there's just this way that we can look at things and how do we actually reframe it so that we've actually been associated with some luck around what we're doing. April, as we think about this from a cultural perspective, when you think about noise as a culture, going over your whole set of experience, what sort of companies do you feel like have been noisy versus not?
Well, sometimes it's the employee population. Like take, for example, a company that has a lot of engineers and, you know, is in aerospace and defense. The noise is different there than Amazon, for example, or a hospital system. You know, there's actually a lot of noise in a hospital system that's different, right? It really depends on the industry, the employee base, and the leadership. There's all different factors in there.
That's great. Yeah, you know, like just thinking, you brought up the aerospace and defense. All right, you got a lot of engineers around. They like to talk about the things that are important and the most elegant solutions that might be around it, which didn't happen to include price associated with it. And people are like, well, we know the right answer. We got to do it. And the whole reason why we got companies is to bring together people with different skills and expertise. Because if we ask the engineer to do the thing every time, it won't be a holistic solution that we need to
They're
be able
also
to work at.
engineers are really compliant too. If you go to them and ask them to like fill out a survey, they all do it. Like, you know, and other populations are like, oh, they're not going to do anything. We're not doing this, you know.
Great. Priya, anything else that you'd add in terms of like how we're shaken out of the noise here?
I just wanted to comment on April's like the engineers comply or fill out the survey. I'm like, are we looking at completely different bunch of engineers? Because I work with engineers and we have to over communicate. Like I do understand that communication or over communication creates a lot of noise, but I have realized that one, I love working with engineers because they're simple human beings and people like us, they depend on us to do a lot of the operational part of work that they don't have time to take care of. That's why we are there to enable them or support them or whatever we want to call it. But I feel they're so head down in doing their work that they miss a lot of things in the process. And that's where over communication comes. But you are right, Matt, when you say that over communication can create a noise. Because I've realized that every time there is an over communication, the bunch of engineers will then be pinging me on Slack. Hey, what is this? I don't get the context of this. Can you explain it to me? So I get it. So it's a very fine line where you stop the communication and help the people, but still continue the hand holding that they might need.
Well, Brian, I'm just thinking like this is my opportunity to talk about the whole goal of communication is to be understood, right? So we're thinking about communication. It's not about just throwing information out there. It's to be understood. And so that should change a lot of how we think about it. Like part of what you're doing when you're over communicating with engineers is saying, I'm going to increase the pain of you actually not paying attention until you have to pay attention. So,
yeah.
Man, I wish I had $1 for every time. I wish you got $1 for every time I said that. Yeah, that's such a good phrase. I forget whoever was in here was talking about like when you're writing a spreadsheet, like the whole thing is all of those things are in service of communication, and that's really who we are as chiefs of staff is facilitating conversations or recognizing when conversations like people aren't being understood and trying to help the understanding or the comprehension happen so the organization can move forward. Like that's such, if you boil down our role to like one thing, that's pretty much it.
Right. Well, and if we think about, if you ask organizations who's in charge of collaboration, sometimes people will say like, oh, it's the head of HR. And it's like, that's definitely not correct. There's all sorts of things that they're focused on, not necessarily collaboration. Some people might say, oh, it's the CTO. They may be providing the tools that are around it. The reality is the person who is thinking about collaboration the most is the chief of staff. within the
Yeah,
organization.
and like here's an example right now where we have a $350 million revenue shortage that we're working to close. It's a huge cross collaborative effort, and we weren't moving fast enough. Like the parts that we needed to get in the open market, because we were following our standard processes, like we were showing up and they were gone, or they were more expensive, lower quality, etc. And so I just went to my principal. I was like, we're shooting ourselves in the foot here. We got to do something different. And it was all about communicating faster, making decisions faster. And she was like, okay, I want you to lead the effort. I'm like, well, why don't you want this person on our team who has all the technical expertise to lead it? Like that's who the team perceives, to be leading this effort. And she's like, yeah, but this person doesn't have the ability to communicate across these teams and make, what needs to happen. They have all the technical expertise in the world, but they don't have the executive presence. In fact, when I coach this person, that's why I'm questioning, this person can't get promoted to senior director because they don't have that one aspect. And so what we're finding in our teams is like, we actually have a lot of directors and senior directors who've been promoted without changes in role scope just because they were doing a good job. And I was like, we have to stop that. Now it's hurting me because I can't get promoted under that same regime. But I also am like, I'd much rather not be promoted and get higher pay to be able to work with a bunch of people who actually have the executive presence that their title holds, so that we can delegate to them the things that they need to do. And I don't have to step in and gap fill a director or senior director who should be able to do this task on his own.
Fair enough. Yeah. So when in doubt, I guess make Brian the human filter. That we gotta be able to all right, time has gone by really quickly. So what we do in the last 10 minutes is we go around what is one idea, concept that stood out from you today. And Quentin, why don't you get us started? What stood out to you today?
I guess one, alignment on strategy is super helpful. So reminding ourselves that part of our role is to be the Vision Sherpa. And I really appreciate the conversation on dissent. And if I can add one other comment there, I think sometimes it's okay to let dissent exist, as long as they don't take up too much space. I think it's imperative not to spend too much time trying to change a mind, and versus just acknowledge that point of view and let it persist. And maybe some other conversations or experience will convert that person, or maybe it won't. But sometimes I think dissent should exist, because it's a great reference point as the team continues to evolve.
Great. And we'll do dissent as a future topic as well, because there was like a lot of great stuff in it. I looked up during the conversation and an hour and 40 minutes was just gone. It was like really, really engaging to think about. Christina, what stood out to you today?
I'll actually go back to what you had in the PowerPoint related to chief of staff role in the chaos. And there was a note, a strategic part is know where we're going, and operational know our competitive advantages. So it seems like chief of staff needs to be in the know, and then needs to make sure that others know it too. So that's a key takeaway for me.
Great. Brian, what stood out for you?
Ooh, I mean, this is just a very timely conversation for me. I got some challenging feedback to respond to, so, mixed with some really positive feedback. I've been in my role about 6 months. So I think in general, like just the overall conversation I really appreciated. I think some of what you guys have said, around like the noise often stemming from anxiety and firefighting culture, which when you go into an organization that's tactical and reactionary, like a lot of organizations are, that's that's how it is. So Jordan, sharing that his organization noise is driven by the anxiety related to layoffs and change. Like I'm just experiencing a lot of that. So it's just great to be in like a safe place where you're with like-minded individuals who know what it's like to be a lonely ass chief of staff, right? Like so I think for me it's just a reflection on like having a good community to come to and be able to vent and get listened to and feel heard.
Great. Casey, what stood out for you today?
I'm going to echo the idea that a lot of the frantic energy you get from executives, the spray and pray, stems from fear and anxiety. And that is such a human flaw that trying to fix it with business process is a failure. And I had never really framed it as fear and anxiety that needs to be dealt with like an emotion first instead of as a business problem.
Great. Priya, your first time. What did you take away?
I believe my biggest takeaway from what Christina had mentioned about staying calm in the chaos, which I think has stuck with me, because I feel a lot of us also, if our leaders are anxious or bringing in the chaos or whatever, I think we somehow absorb that chaotic energy. How do we still stay calm and communicate that calmness around to the team? Because see, we are the door to reaching to the leaders. So if we are calm, we can communicate that to the wider team.
Awesome.
I love that.
Miho, what stood out to you?
I actually didn't know about descent and alignment. So I quickly looked up, and I still have to do more to understand. So look forward to the future session.
Great. April.
What Sylvia said, a reminder to use, levity and humor in times of stress and sort of like, I mean, I think sometimes you hear things and people feel things, and sometimes you're like, "God, that's just ridiculous." And like pointing out that it's ridiculous sometimes is half the battle.
Yeah, I mean, you actually need a pretty extensive bag of tools to be able to use. Sometimes you got to use humor. It's out there. That ought to be a tool you can go to. Jason, what stood out for you?
I too enjoyed the entire conversation. I'll echo kind of what Brian said as I start this new role with a company that is operating frantically, and for reasons as a startup, it will how to dial down the noise, focus on what's important, and get my head above water. So I enjoyed that part of the conversation. Casey, I think, brought up something that is extremely important as well when recognizing that anxiety drives these random ideas that get sprayed out, and the chaos, the anxiety drives that chaos, and it's all driven by emotion, right? And I don't think a lot of people see it like that. Everybody wants to think, well, I'm making these emotionless decisions, but we're human. Every decision is based on emotion. It's just a function of how can you recognize the emotion in somebody else, empathize with it, and then use that to, or at least work with that to try and dial down the emotion and get everybody less anxious.
Great. Sylvia, what'd you take away today?
Keep the calm. I think as chief of staffs, we are definitely assigned to align with the mission and the vision of the company. So therefore, when we allow for communication to happen, we should definitely listen and acknowledge and take actions.
Awesome. Great discussion today. Really enjoyed what we went through on it. There's always aspects to be able to learn from this. We are a membership organization. If you're interested in joining as a member, let us know. We'd love to be able to have you. Also, Betsy I don't know if you have already, the flyer for the Leadership That Lifts event that we're doing in Colorado Springs, October 3rd. We'd love to invite you to that if you're interested in going. Christina's already signed up. It'd be a great event where you can meet a number of other folks who, are working towards a lot of the same things that you are. How am I making my organization work better? But we can give you more information on that as well. Other than that, happy Friday. Really good to see you all, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good to see you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Friday.
Brian,